name is Tom Silva. I'm the Community Advocacy Specialist for Foodlink, and today we are joined by Simeon Banister, who is the Vice President of Community Programs at the Rochester Area Community Foundation, and Jes Scannell, who is the Director of Career Empowerment here at Foodlink. And as we get towards the end of Hunger Action Month, we are looking to highlight some of the work that other folks are doing in the community and some of the work that Foodlink is doing in the community around not just feeding people today, but making sure that people have the resources that they need to feed themselves and their families tomorrow and lead healthy and nourishing lives. So we are going to be talking this morning about employment. We'll be talking about living wage jobs. We'll be talking about job training programs and some of the trends and programs and policies that Simeon and Jes see in the Rochester community that either can be improved on or things that are being worked on already. So I will turn it over to both of them just to do a quick introduction, name, title, general work that you do, and then we'll get into the conversation. So we'll start with Jes.
Good morning. Thanks, Tom. Happy to be here. My name is Jes Scannell. I'm the Director of Career Empowerment Initiatives here at Foodlink, which encompasses all of our workforce development and training programs here at the food bank. I think that the most relevant thing that I'll be speaking about today is our Foodlink Career Fellowship, which is a year-long culinary apprenticeship program aimed to prepare folks to be competitive in middle skills jobs in our regional culinary industry.
Hi, I'm Simeon Banister. I'm Vice President of Community Programs at Rochester Area Community Foundation. At the Community Foundation, we focus on two areas. Equity and vitality are goals that we're trying to push for in the Rochester region. Our mission is to empower donors and community partners to strengthen our region through philanthropy. And so the basic inference there is that the areas that we can stand to strengthen are equity and vitality. We tend to think at the systems level. And so the question is, how do all of the systems that we're engaged in interact with one another in ways that create more equity in the community, and then ultimately lead to a more vibrant community for all of us to enjoy. And obviously food systems play a critical part of that conversation.
Cool, thank you both. I think we're gonna start off with Jes, and just to frame the conversation a little bit right now, we're talking September of 2020. Obviously, coronavirus pandemic still going very strong. Unemployment in Rochester, I think, is over 10%, maybe around 12%. So obviously we're in a real critical moment right now for folks trying to find good employment, but this was an issue that well preceded coronavirus. And Jes, would love for you to just talk a little bit about the work that you do and the work that we're doing at Foodlink right now to get people into not just jobs, but good jobs and career track jobs, and the relationship between hunger and those jobs, and sort of why Foodlink would engage in that kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the quick answer is anything that we can do to shorten the line or to reduce the number of folks that would need our emergency food services is something that feels very mission aligned. So that, in combination with good stewardship of our resources, we have this amazing community kitchen that is that we worked really hard to build and to make state of the art and to maximize that space. Those two were kind of no-brainers for the organization in terms of starting a culinary training program. Additionally, there's a need regionally, even today with all of the issues with the pandemic, for folks who have experience in the kitchen, who are well trained and who have the support. So we started this program 3 years ago. It's definitely taken a number of different twists and turns to be responsive to what the community needs and to what our fellows need in the program. The training is a year long in stages. There's a pre-apprenticeship and then an actual New York State certified apprenticeship. And we have employer partners who fund and train for the last 3 months of the program. I think one of the things that's unique about this program specifically is that it's a holistic approach. So it's not just hard skills training, but it's really digging in for an entire year to what are the things that have kept people from sustainable employment in the past, and how can we meet and address those barriers utilizing the vast community resources that we have, but making those connections strong and smart for the individuals that come through the program. So that's everything from attending a parent-teacher conference with a single mom who has some concern or insecurity about how her child is doing in school, but doesn't feel yet comfortable advocating for herself, to attending court, to figuring out housing issues, to connecting with parole and probation. It really runs the gamut of how to address the challenges that folks might face that could keep them from being able to maintain or be on the track for promotion for family sustaining wage jobs. I feel like I could go on and on, Tom, but I might just wrap it up right there.
That feels like a great place to start off on. Then, Simeon, wondering if you could kind of scale us out a little bit from onto the sort of regional and citywide level, and talk about some of what's going on with employment and living wage jobs structurally in Rochester.
Sure. So let me just offer the preface that, like so many of the viewers, I'm sure we're doing some home learning and homeschooling here. And so if you hear any of that in the background, forgive us now. I'll also just preface by sharing my excitement about the kind of work that Jes is doing. It's so critical, so important for us to reconceive our systems and to think about them not just as kind of charitable endeavors, right? So just providing food to people, but to think about the kind of economic development prospects that are embedded in some of the work that we're doing. So in this case, Foodlink is, essentially creating job opportunities in the community, in the food system, so that folks that are the most impacted end up becoming, in a lot of ways, the answer themselves to some of the challenges that we're confronting. I think regionally, there's some interesting things that are happening. Tom, you already mentioned the unemployment rate as a function of coronavirus. We already know that even preceding the pandemic, the unemployment in certain communities, particularly communities of color, was already nearly double that of white communities. I would also point out, we recently released a report, the Hard Facts. It was an update from an original report that we did in 2017. We released a new report just a couple of weeks ago. And the challenge is that when we look in a number of different areas, we see these same kinds of disparities that pop up, right? And what's fascinating in our community is that we have a city center that has a lot of challenges. We have a suburban ring that actually performs, fairly strong, even relative to kind of national counterparts. And then we have an exurban rural ring that deals with a lot of challenges. And one of the things that's fascinating is to think about how we connect the city center with the exurban rural areas, where you have a lot of agricultural activity, and then in the city you've got food systems that are, in some ways been decimated because of the economic environment. So I think there's some real opportunities. You guys have already been doing some great stuff at Foodlink on this front, but even making more direct connections. I know that there's a conversation around how to start food-based businesses, leveraging some of the agricultural opportunities around the community. I think that that's a really exciting area to explore. Definitely want to lean in there a little bit more. And again, really thinking about how we generate those new job opportunities, those new, ways to earn dollars, and to kind of take some of the modeling that we've had and kind of flip it on its head a little bit. Many of the systems that we have in Rochester are the legacy of a period in Rochester, particularly interesting in the 1950s, the 60s, the 70s, where there was massive social change. And you can see the echoes of some of the decisions from that period today. And so in my mind, there's a real opportunity again to flip some of that on its head and to fundamentally rethink how resources flow through our community. And again, food's a pretty important part of that.
Yeah, and we're certainly in what feels like another massive period of kind of social change on a lot of levels. So I'd love to return to that thought in a little bit and just talk about some of the things that both of you see as hopeful things or things that we should be moving towards. But before we do that, I want to get both of your reaction to something that we hear somewhat often when we talk about the work that Foodlink does in feeding people in the community and just the level of need even pre-pandemic. And oftentimes the reaction, to all the feeding programs as well, like if the people who were going to the pantry spent that time looking for a job, or if they were working instead of going and looking for kind of food resources, their balance of time would be different and they'd be better off in the long run. And this sort of rhetoric finds its way into federal policy, where last year the USDA introduced a proposed rule where folks who are considered able-bodied adults without dependents, which is a kind of technical category that the USDA designates, would need to be participating in some kind of workforce training program or proving that they're on some kind of job search to be able to continue receiving SNAP benefits for more than 3 months out of every 3-year period. And those rules existed in the early 2000s, and they were relaxed following the 2008 recession, and the administration just last year was trying to kind of cut those rules back again. And would just be curious from your perspective, either personal or a kind of like a structural research level, of what you would say to folks about this idea of this kind of binary trade-off. You're either getting a job and looking for a job, or you're, getting SNAP benefits, or you're at the pantries, and those are the only 2 options.
So anybody that knows me well knows that I have a personal bug in my craw about binaries, because they often just don't work. Life presents us with gray area, and so we have to be attentive to that. The other thing that's been a little bit of a bug in my craw lately, and I know that this is true for a lot of folks in the community, is the extent to which policymakers, decision makers, folks that have influence, in many ways are disconnected from the actual lives of people on the ground. And so it's easy to come up with these, frankly, these delusions about how life is carried out if you're not actually connected with people that are living those lives. What I know about poverty is that it represents a compression of time and choice, right? Everything takes longer, getting places takes longer, dealing with, issues takes longer, and there are fewer choices that, you have to try to, kind of move through the world and to respond to the needs that you have. And so it's really rather ridiculous to kind of point fingers at individuals. I don't think anybody, avoids the concept of personal responsibility, but we also have to acknowledge that our systems in many ways are the problems, that the barriers that the system creates because of some of the ignorant policy making that defines, the approach for creating those systems is so predominant. One thing I'd say is, I would encourage folks, and this is, kind of an interesting way to get familiar with the challenges of poverty. There's, some dynamics there that are problematic, but suffice it to say that CCSI and others do poverty simulations. It is not walking in the shoes of someone poor. I just want to be clear about that. But it is a way to get familiar with some of the pressure and some of the frustration of being poor in a community like ours. And so I would encourage folks to kind of check those out, for viewers that are interested. They obviously have been a little bit more contracted in this environment that we're in with the pandemic. They're typically take place with large groups of people, but it's a worthwhile exercise to see just how challenging it is, again, to exercise basic, needs, the resources that are available in the community if you are a person that is living in poverty. So.
Yeah, I mean, I have a hard time with anything that puts conditions on people's ability to feed themselves and their families. First and foremost, I agree with everything that Simeon said. And I think that for me, as I've watched people earn above minimum wage by $3 or $4 and still struggle, so do what people would say are all the right things, which is challenging language even of itself, and still face challenges and choices around food and rent, or rent and medicine. Many of our folks, even though they have been phenomenally successful over the past year and a half, are one, kind of car repair away from having to make some really difficult decisions around how they feed their families. And one of the challenges I think we face in workforce development world and job training, and that includes the employers that are open to creating cultures that are welcoming to folks who are transitioning from poverty, is to really keep that present of mind that those challenges exist. And so how do we create on-ramps for folks to meet those needs, to build individual family and familial wealth. And I don't mean wealth like you get to buy whatever you want. I mean wealth like you know where your next meal is coming from and that you can cover next month's bills. That definition of wealth. And I think that ties into how we quite frankly, how we fund programming like the fellowship and what we consider a success in a program like this. So often workforce development programs are transactional and not transformational. And if we're really going to try to impact the lives of folks who have faced generational poverty, it's not a 12-month training program and then see you later, because we know that the statistics say anywhere between 40 and 60% of folks 4 years after they've left poverty have fallen back into it. And what are the support systems that we're missing there, or the structures that could be in place to make sure that people continue to be able to meet the challenges of life, even when they're doing all the right things, as opposed to falling back into some really challenging situations. And so at the fellowship, while we are scrappy in terms of how we maneuver the program and fund the program, we're committed to folks 4 years after they graduate. And that's when we think we'll be able to see some sort of success.
Well, thank you both so much. I want to just, as we get ready to close out, return to something that Simeon said earlier about how we're living with kind of the relics of programs developed in the 1960s during really fundamentally, changes in the social fabric in the United States, and would be interested in hearing things that both of you are either hoping for or watching for or feeling hopeful about right now, either on an individual level or on a kind of like social and policy level, as it relates to either employment or job training or just kind of moving towards a more equitable employment system for people in the community and in the country.
Sure. I mean, one thing I'd think has really been, just as a legacy holdover, is the way that we even define poverty. Still is so problematic because it doesn't actually match with lived experience. And so we know that, living a sustainable life in a community, even like Rochester, with its, kind of relative costs that are lower than, other places in the country, still, besets people with a lot of difficulty. And so we've got to think through the poverty thresholds just don't work. And so there's been some interesting work to really kind of redefine what we mean by poverty. So that's number one. Number two, I think the way that we think about some of these challenges is on a very individualized basis. And I think the unit of analysis of focusing on individuals without kind of taking the step back and seeing the kind of macro picture really leaves us, bereft of some key tools that we need. So in a place like Rochester, we're not just talking about individuals that kind of pop up in poverty. We have whole sections of the community that are dealing with serious deprivation. And that's a different scope and scale of problem. But a lot of folks, I think, in Rochester are coming together. We're using, the tools of collective impact and other resources to start to try to think on that front. But it seems to me that the missing link still is, how do we at scale engage with folks in our community to learn from folks that are in, the kind of most challenging and most vulnerable situations, so that they actually inform. In some ways, we're at the Community Foundation, we've been thinking about how we change the format for some of the problem solving that we do. A lot of work has been data driven and then to a lesser extent community informed. What if we tried community driven and data informed, right? Getting information in front of folks so that they can make informed decisions about the direction that our systems need to go. And there's some things that we can do on that front, including in the food system. I've seen it through COVID, where Foodlink itself has really kind of adapted initially some of the modeling, there were gaps, excuse me, segments in the community that were left out just because, a pandemic pops up and you're trying to kind of, adapt to a really challenging set of circumstances. What's exciting is how do we get the kind of intel so that folks in the community can kind of point us to where the needs are and how food can be delivered and how food should operate. And even more than that, connecting to Jes's work, as we start to build the entrepreneurial activity in the community, and we see a community that's more well-resourced, that the community itself is prepared to then kind of take the reins in terms of providing some of that kind of support. So I think that there's some interesting developments that are, potentially on the table. I must confess, though, I am nervous. And the reason why I'm nervous is because situations like these kind of, watershed moments like this pandemic and some of the racial strife that we're seeing, they can go two ways, or they can go multiple ways, actually. Let me not get trapped in the binary thinking, but they can go multiple ways. And so we've got to be really thoughtful about how we want to see this community continue to evolve and not kind of reflexively fall back into some habits of the kind of old ways of doing things that left us with a community that was inequitable and frankly not particularly practical in terms of its construct. So I'm cautiously optimistic about what happens next, but definitely know that we've got to be community driven. Folks in the community have to be able to drive the process, and then we can inform that with data.
I think that one of the things that I've seen that has been hopeful is the responsiveness of some of our employer partners to some of the challenges of individual employees, essential workers, folks working in food, and their own challenges in navigating both sustaining their employment and supporting their children at home. So there's been some increased flexibility or conversations that I think weren't happening before that are happening now. And I'm nervous because I worry that we'll fall backwards once there's a vaccine or something like that. But I think that we're at this place where conversations around, for lack of a better word, work-life balance, and conversations around flexible scheduling, and even, some of the conversations I've had with employers around race and racial injustice and what they are actively doing in their structure to address those systems, I think has been inspiring, a long time coming, but inspiring. And I hope that we're able to capitalize on this momentum to keep that going and to make things, to not, as many people say, not go back to normal, but to create something anew.
Can I just pick up on something that Jes said? Because I think that she made a critical point about how the employers themselves have to continue to evolve and change. I think, if you look at the legacy of Rochester, many of our employers, I think, really missed out on a lot because they didn't see diversity. They didn't see, as kind of like a business imperative, right? That literally their, organizations run better when you've got, different voices that are at the table. And so it's really, there's certainly obviously a very compelling moral argument to make, but there's also a very practical business argument to make, right? That, if you're going to be successful, particularly in this era, you're going to need to really lean into making sure that you're providing those kinds of resources for employees in the same way that, it's almost unthinkable now that any significant business wouldn't provide health insurance to its employees, because that you need people that are going to be healthy to come to work every day, right? Well, guess what? You also need people that can eat. You also need folks that can, access housing and so on and so forth. And so one of the things that we've embraced is the Center for Open Hiring here in Rochester, and excited to talk to Jes about making the linkage there, where we're hiring no background checks, no drug tests, all those barriers that we know, getting people into, opportunities so that they can really realize their fullest human potential, but also surrounding them with the kinds of resources that they need to be successful in sustaining and maintaining the positions that they ultimately get. And so that includes food, and it includes assistance with housing and all the relative social services. Again, not just as the right thing to do, though it is, but also because it's the smart thing to do if we want a community that's going to thrive and be vibrant.
Yeah, and I see that as a sweet spot for workforce development organizations to help move the ball forward a little bit. I mean, one of the things we're doing here at Foodlink, because I've been a fan of open hiring in Grayston for a long time, but I think that many people have difficulty envisioning an HR department that does some of the things that we're talking about, or how do I create a culture, or what do you mean I don't do background checks? So I think that at Foodlink, we've just hired an occupational social worker, an employee development specialist whose responsibility is to meet the needs of our staff to keep them connected and healthy so that they can be the type of contributors to the organization that we need to move our mission and our vision forward. So we as workforce development professionals could support employers in thinking through, right, you might still need to do background checks, but what are the steps that you could take right now to create a different culture at your organization that is putting people first and that is valuing the holistic employee and moving them along as the organization grows and prospers, and really helping employers to think what are the steps that they could take to move their organization in that way. And I think that as workforce development folks, that's an area where we could be contributing or connecting differently than we have been in the past.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jes, Simeon, for being in conversation about this with us and with Foodlink. We'll definitely include links to the Rochester Area Community Foundation, more information about the Career Fellowship Program, and information for folks to check out that Center for Open Hiring as well. And check out that information, share it with your own employer, and starting with your own workplace, find out how accessible some of those practices are. But yeah, thank you both, and we appreciate the time.